Well, this week marks the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Civil Rights Act. At the Lyndon B. Johnson Presidential Library this week, America's first black president honored Johnson's legacy. Mr. Obama was just 2 years old when the law was signed.
The story of America is a story of progress. However slow, however incomplete, however harshly challenged at each point on our journey, however flawed our leaders, however many times we had to take a quarter of a loaf or half a loaf, the story of America is a story of progress.
And joining us this morning is Professor Michael Genovese from Loyola Marymount University. Welcome back to the show. And how significant was the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964?
Well, it had enormous consequences. It changed America. I remember as a small boy, my father driving us through the South and stopping at the side of the road and pointing to a sign and saying, "What does that say?" Whites only. "What does that say?" No coloreds. And he used it as an opportunity to teach about the ugliness of hatred and bigotry. My students today think that's ancient history, but it's not. It's in our time. In historical terms, just the blink of an eye.
And politically, there was a huge impact.
Tremendous impact. It shifted the tectonic plates of American politics because prior to that time, from 1932 on, Franklin Roosevelt cobbled together what was called the New Deal Coalition, and it was left, moderate, Union, and white Southerners. That makes for strange bedfellows, but FDR was able to keep it together. After FDR, the party always had a hard time cobbling it back together. After the '65 Civil Rights Act and then the Voting Rights Act, what was at one time the solid Democratic South shifted and became very quickly the solid Republican South.
And let's take a look at the electoral maps from the past few decades.
Okay. Well, if you look at 1960 to begin, you see in the South, very mixed, some red, some blue states. And so the Democrats could not have won in '60, very close race, without southern states. Jump ahead to 1980, just 20 years, look at that. It's almost all red.
Wow. And so the Democratic Party paid a heavy price for supporting civil rights legislation.
It did. And even if you look at the third map, it's all red there. And the party did pay a price, but John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, the pragmatic politician in both of them, recognized that there would be a price to pay, that it was putting the Democratic voting bloc into jeopardy. But they did it anyway, to their great credit.
And did it also change voting patterns in other ways?
It changed tremendously the way people voted. African Americans became solid Democrats, and whites, especially white males, became solid Republicans. 80% of Mitt Romney's vote in 2012 was whites. And in the last 4 or 5 presidential elections, roughly 90% of African Americans vote for the Democratic candidate.
Now, a lot has been made this week of the leadership of Lyndon Johnson and the passing of the Civil Rights Act. Is this credit really deserved?
Yes and no. We tend to think of our leaders as saviors riding on a white horse and slaying dragons and being our heroes. Reality is not like that. In America, change takes place in a 3-stage process. In stage 1, it's grassroots citizens who agitate, sit down at lunch counters, march, picket. That draws some attention. And it might get to stage 2 when that agitation becomes a movement. And that movement starts to pick up steam. Leaders come in at stage 3. So Lyndon Johnson rode on the wave of a movement. He didn't create the movement, he took advantage of it. And so give him incredibly high marks for his legislative skill getting that through. He may have been the only modern president who could have done it other than FDR. But it wasn't him alone. It was a lot of the unsung heroes, the people who marched, who sat down at a lunch counter, a whites-only lunch counter. Those are the heroes to me as well.
And we are a different country because of those people.
We're a dramatically different country. It used to be that from the very beginning, we had great ideals, freedom, liberty, justice, equality. But there was always a blemish. We didn't live up to those because we had a huge chunk of our people enslaved. Lincoln recognized this when he said, how can we be the beacon of the world when we have people enslaved? And so what happened was that because of the 1960s Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and others, we started to bring our practices better in line with our values.
And would you say that Martin Luther King's dream has been realized?
No, we've made tremendous progress, no question about it. But we're still fighting battles, and we still need to fight those battles. Today, there are a number of states that have already passed, and others that are in the process of trying to get passed, legislation to limit voting, to restrict voting. They argue, I think fraudulently, that it's about protecting the integrity of the voting process from fraud. That's not what it's about. It's about trying to exclude parts of our country, significant segments of our country, from voting. People who are qualified to vote will not be allowed to vote. And so we've come a long way, but we have a long, long way to go yet.
Unfortunately, there are still people fighting for that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.